Hello, and welcome to today's ACMP member webinar. Our topic, TLDR, Tell Me What to Do When It Needs to Get Done, will be presented by Katie Brandt and Stacy Dunbar. My name is Michelle Levy, and I am a member of the ACMP Digital Learning Committee. I will be your moderator today, and before we get started, I would like to share some information on the latest happenings at ACMP. Join us for the next in-person summit, Change Management Summit Toronto 2023, September 29th through 30th. This summit includes live in-person sessions, post-conference workshops, intimate learning environment, and an abundant networking opportunities. The agenda is now available and register at acmpsummit.com. Change Management Master Series 2023 is an interactive virtual experience consisting of advanced, in-depth sessions delivered over 6 weeks. Engaging, informative, and collaborative, the Masterclass series will expand and enhance your expertise within the change management discipline. Learn about Masterclass and register at acmpglobal.org/page/masterclass-2023. ACMP's prestigious certification program has over 2,000 CCMPs. Now is the time to join this elite class of change management professionals and experience the opportunities the CCMP will open up for you. The exam is open year-round and available online and in person. Also, did you know that ACMP now offers CCMP corporate packages? They are a great way to train your staff and enjoy the bundle discount. Or, if you currently hold a CCMP, perhaps it's time to renew. For more information on applying for or renewing your CCMP, please visit acmpglobal.org/CCMP. One of our most valued member benefits in our ACMP resource library is the ability to access 10 years worth of member-only tools, webinars, conference presentations, and white papers. The resource library is consistently ranked as one of our top member benefits, so we hope that you will take advantage of it. Our next webinar is Thursday, June 29th, 2023, with speaker Barbara Troutline. The topic presented at the seminar is Lead Through the ARCs of Change and Crisis. And remember that by attending webinars, you can earn PDUs towards maintaining your CCMP. Be sure to register at the event calendar at acmpglobal.org and discover other educational opportunities that might be of interest to you. And please tell your colleagues that joining ACMP gets them access to at least 22 member webinars each year. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping items. All audio lines have been muted, and today's webinar will run until 1 p.m. Eastern Time. If you have questions during the presentation, please post it in the question box in the panel on the right-hand side of your screen in your GoToWebinar user interface panel. Questions for the presenters will be answered at the end of the presentation. And now, I would like to introduce today's presenters, Katie Brandt and Stacy Dunbar. Katie Brandt is a ProSci certified organizational change management consultant with AVAT, an industry-focused IT services and management consulting firm. With expertise in change management, executive leader counsel, strategic communications, and thought leadership, Katie has experience across industries, including insurance, financial services, gas, utilities, and state government. Stacy Dunbar is our second presenter, and she is a principal consultant with AVAT. Her experience includes managing large-scale projects for Fortune 100 and international companies, As an organizational change management consultant and PMP, Stacy helps companies advance strategic priorities and successfully transition employees to a business's new normal. Stacy's work with HR and deep experience in change and project management focuses on helping employees to be ready, willing, and able to make a new transition. Please welcome Katie, and Stacy.
Thanks, Michelle.
Thanks, Michelle.
All right, well, we will go ahead and jump in. As Michelle said, please put any questions in the question box. We'll have a couple places as well where we'll ask you to chime in with some ideas and experiences in the chat as well. But to get started, you saw the title of our webinar today is TLDR. Tell me what I need to know when I need to do something different. So what does TLDR actually mean? Well, it means too long, didn't read. So this is kind of an internet term, first used in 2002. It's used in a couple different ways if you've never seen it before. One is literally to say, this is something that would require too much time to read. So they kind of stamp it on there. It's too long, I did not read it. But it can also be used as kind of a tag in an article or post to then summarize the key message, right? So here's the whole information, but if it's too long and you're not going to read it, here's the summary or the takeaway item. If you just want the essentially the Cliff Notes version of it, right? It's an internet version of Cliff Notes. So that's what we mean when we talk about TLDR. It's something, you know, we get that feedback, it's too long and I don't want to read it. So let's talk about why people are struggling with this, right? Why is this a term in today's world? And really it comes down to information overload, right? Overall, in society, we're seeing unrelenting change and a really quick pace of change, especially in the technology industry and with our IT systems. We also, therefore, have a lot of pressure to be resilient, right? You're dealing with it at home, you're dealing with it at work. People think you're used to it, and so you can just keep going and keep figuring it out. Adding to that, the shifting work models and business priorities. We're seeing a lot of companies that are having to update their IT systems, big systems that are needing to be updated. Those shifting work models, working from home, relying more on technology for our everyday work, as well as how we store information, how we communicate. A lot of interaction with IT models at work. And then outside of work, right, we have always on social media and 24-hour news cycles. There's information coming at us all the time, even when we leave the office. And then you pile on top of all of that a global pandemic, and you get people who are overwhelmed, right? They are overwhelmed with information, with data, with stories, with all kinds of things, and they're kind of tapping out, right? And so you see there on the left, research is showing that our average attention span is down to 47 seconds, right? It continues to go down. We don't have the time or attention to give to things. We only want to pay attention to the things that are the most urgent or the things that we need to do right, you know, coming up quickly. So that's kind of where we're looking at this problem of, you know, as change management. The first step is awareness, right? And people don't want to know about it too early because if they can't do something different, they don't want to know. So Stacy's going to tell us more about how to recognize that in our projects.
Maybe if the screen wants to go forward. There we go. So really it's about what are we starting to see? You know, we just are really seeing a trend. And Katie and I kind of started this because we had a couple clients where the people were literally saying, don't tell me about a change is coming because you're really just making me more stressful. Just tell me when you need me to do something different. And that kind of goes against everything we were, you know, taught. People are, I've got other things to think about. You notice people aren't asking questions in meetings because it's, yeah, that's down the road. Or maybe not even attending meetings. And they want more detail. What one client told me was, you know, this whole idea of a change is coming really just adds more stress. and I don't need any more stress in my day. Just tell me when you need me to do something. So that's kind of the things that we started to see and started to hear, is people wanted really defined, definitive details on what the change was. So getting them involved early was really proving to be difficult, because frankly, sometimes the decisions aren't even made when you first start really talking about this to try to get people involved.
The other thing I'll add there, Stacy, right, is even projects people want,
Yeah.
right? I've been on a couple that have been new systems or something that they're excited to get rid of the old solution, but still you have longer timelines. Some of these are multi-year projects, and even when they want the thing that's coming, they don't have the attention span or the time to give to it. So yeah, it's hard.
The capacity for change in general.
Yeah,
definitely. So go ahead and chat if you can. And what other symptoms have you seen of this information fatigue, or what other signs have you been watching for? Maybe the ACMP, if we got things coming into chat. I can't see things from everyone.
I think, and this is Michelle, I think one of the things that I see with overload is that people won't even open an email communication if the topic's too long, or what you're asking or telling about is not in the first paragraph. Do you have any examples of that, or how you overcome that you might talk about later in the seminar?
Yeah, we do. That's kind of some of our tips and tricks on how you get their attention and how you can keep their attention. Anything else coming into chat? There's the. All right. I'm going to go ahead and move on. I don't see anything coming in. So now, just to Michelle's point, we're going to talk about some tips and tricks. And there's just 5 engagement tips that we're looking at today. The first one is really meeting them where they already are. You know, this multiple meetings, and really, how do we not like invent new meetings and do additional asks of their time to talk about these things? So, you know, these change messages are nonstop. So we really try to join existing team meetings, town halls, training centers. You know, I had a client who then suddenly wanted all these, you know, 100 people that are on the Change Champions to join these meetings, and it was a hospital. And so dealing with schedules was difficult, dealing, you know, communication with nurses in different groups. So we had all these Change Champions, but even trying to get them to meet was a challenge. So we found that we could do a lot of communication even with the Change Champions by just supplying them with 5-minute things that they could share in their existing team meetings. We joined existing team meetings, but groups like that really have stand-up meetings and have lots of daily interaction. So trying not to send extra emails or things specifically on the topic at hand and the change topic until you get closer to deployment. And, you know, my suggestion is really lean on those business partners, lean on those champions to be doing the majority of the conversation for you. The familiar face and them going, hey, can I just have 5 minutes in the next meeting, really is much more effective than trying to set up additional town halls and additional meetings and additional emails. So to Michelle's question before, you know, try not to send out really long emails, just kind of intersperse into things they're already reading, or daily updates that they get, or a newsletter, or those sorts of things.
And this is where, if you can get metrics, it helps, right? With our client, if you can figure out what of the existing tools are the most effective, and then really prioritize trying to get the message into those things, whether it's a newsletter, whether it's town halls, if their town halls are really well attended, whatever it might be, try to plan strategically so that you're not hitting them everywhere, but just really being thoughtful and intentional about where you're taking that message, especially early on in the project.
Definitely. Katie.
Perfect. Well, our second tip really feeds off of what Stacy just talked about those familiar faces, right? Those familiar voices. And this is really taking advantage of influencers as a broad category. But, the voice of who's sharing the information really, really matters. People don't want to hear from random project team members or contractors or, people whose names they've never heard about before and won't hear from after. So really making sure that those people that they're used to hearing from, that they trust, that we're arming them with the right information. So when we think about this, who does this really include? This could be everyone from subject matter experts who are actually engaged with the project. They're providing expertise within the actual development work, and so therefore they can help take messages back out to their peers, but also lean into change networks, right? Whether it's an existing one or whether you have to kind of set one up specific for your program. These are usually handpicked people or people who have volunteered, right, to be a voice within their teams. So take advantage of those networks when you have access to them. And then, key influencers and team leads, we all know that there are voices in our teams who are stronger than others, right? Whether they're early adopters and so they always know the latest information, or whether they're really tenured people who, people trust to kind of steer them in the right directions. Working with leadership to identify some of those really strong voices in the room, and making sure that they're included and incorporated in this to help kind of get beyond some of the more traditional communication methods. And then when you have these people, right, when you have that kind of group of influencers, it's making sure that they have access to the information, right? What's the messaging? What's the story we're telling? Are there good examples or demos, right? Visual demonstrations are great ways to engage people and get them interested in, especially if it's a new system they're going to have to learn, giving them kind of sneak peeks into it. But are there, interesting statistics of ways that their day-to-day is going to be helped or improved? Are there success stories from other people in the industry? What are the things that these folks can start to just talk about, right, in their day-to-day with their peers to help bring awareness without it being in such a formal way? The key tip here, though, is also to make sure that you don't forget that that's a two-way street, right? If this group is out and they have access to those people and they have the conversations, right, they're also then going to be hearing what questions people have or what the feedback is. If people are excited, if there's something that, people are more excited about that we didn't anticipate, right, that's a great feedback mechanism coming back to you to understand kind of the voice of the employee and therefore adjust and kind of improve your strategy as you go. So make sure it's a two-way street there. The client example for this that I like to use, and one of my current clients, right, we have a system change coming, and we've been sending out high-level messaging and making sure people are aware. But some of the best engagement we've seen is when our UI UX team or our product owners are out in the field and they're able to just open up the app to the sandbox environment and show people what they're talking about, and people are, oh, wait, that's really interesting, right? Or that's going to be a lot better. And really being able to connect the message with those real life examples or someone who has been in the field with them, who understand the nuance of how these changes are going to impact and improve their experience. So really making sure that it's someone who speaks their language, has helped engage them in a way that, even taking a couple of slides to a town hall maybe doesn't get to. So it's kind of that multifaceted approach.
I think a really good example of this too, Katie and I worked for a very large company before we moved over to AVAP, and they took advantage of their associate resource groups. So they were going through a really large ERP transformation, and they made the resource group for the administrative assistants the change people. And anyone knows that the administrative assistants pretty much run the company in reality, and they have that good two-way. And so that was just really a brilliant idea to go, and there were 350 in that group, and they touched everything. So then as the project went along, they could help, they could do all those things, and they were definitely influencers. They had influence with their boss and everyone on the team, and then they were a great great feedback component, and people trusted them because at the end of the day, they're running the joint, right?
Absolutely.
The other thing is you don't have to share it all at once. Someone said on a call the other day, how to eat the elephant, and I still don't really understand that, since I don't ever want to eat an elephant, but it's one bite at a time. And so, it's trying to make sure you're not going into, a whole lot of detail and a lot of things, rather giving those bite-sized chunks to help them understand and really retain that key content. It's easier to get it all down. I used to work at a newspaper, and Katie, I'm not sure, likes this joke, but they used to say it has to only be as long as someone can read on the toilet. So any story you did had to have that really short, 8 to 10 inches. With this, I'd say when you're talking about this, you don't have to have the whole plan. Yeah, maybe you as a change person are aware, and the executives are aware, but you don't have to go start from finish, especially when we're on some of these ERP projects and bigger projects that are 2 years long. They don't have to know every step along the way. So try to really focus on, the benefits they can expect. And, we all know about the WIFM, but use demos and screenshots and pull quotes, celebrate those small wins. That's all basic stuff, but we're so great at wanting to lay out that full plan that we forget that they just need to know what they need to know as we go along. And in those, dropping those in, as Katie talked about in the last thing, having those people that are influencers take 5 minutes, rather than, okay, here, we like to hear ourselves talk, and here's the entire plan for the next 2.5 years, because that becomes overwhelming. So really, the suggestion that you also don't want to forget is being able to show people that you do have that feedback loop, that you are listening to that stuff that's coming from those influencers or those change champions. And find those examples and show them little changes that were made because of their input. I'm one of those change management people that actually loves resistance. I think it makes for a better product. And so really just getting that feedback, hearing those concerns, and being able to make those little tweaks and say, we heard you. And that does help them get that ownership. The client example I have for this is, I was just on a 2-year project that had already been going 6 months before they really brought change in, and everyone was tired of the changes coming, and that's what it kind of was at first. There were no real changes coming, and so we started to just kind of sprinkle that in and give them kind of bites of what we're going to do, and a proof of concept kind of ideas, and did things where we really were just talking to a smaller group of people, even though it was an entire company-wide thing. So we kind of picked and chose who we wanted to communicate in small little groups and small little messages.
And that's the thing, Stacy, right? We used to put together the walking deck, and you could live off of a walking deck for a long time while you made the rounds to all the stakeholders, right? And it was that high level messaging and the big changes that were coming. And you can still, that's still great foundational messaging, and you certainly need that. But to your point, right, you get some of these really long-term projects, 2 years, big system changes. And once you've heard it, you might need like a quick refresher for context of like, what are we talking about again? But they've already heard that information. And so to your point, then how do you start pulling in some of those smaller updates, the smaller wins, the things that are happening more in real time to help people stay engaged across the life cycle? And it's absolutely right? These bite-sized chunks, these small things to help kind of keep people in the conversation with you.
So Michelle, anything coming in through the questions so far?
There are, and this is a very interesting question and really related to some of the symptoms that we're seeing, but there was a lack of attention during the awareness stage, but panic when announcing the imminent changes. Can you give some more helpful tips on how to deal with the panic stage?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the things we've talked about is giving that to them in smaller bites and really focusing on that, the benefits of it. And I was just rolled off another project, which is wonderful. I had a wonderful team, and we always, in every training, there was a benefit slide of what the benefits are. And it's just 5 bullets. And every time we go to do it, they're like, well, they've seen this stuff before. And I said, I don't care if you just put it on the screen for 2 minutes, just 2 seconds even, as long as it's up there. I want that to be kind of burned into their brain. And so we did. And we were doing 2 classes a day for many different groups of people, and that slide, that benefit slide on why we were doing it and what was in it for them was in every deck. We didn't do the whole deck. We didn't go through the whole, oh, this is what's happening, but that one slide was in everything we did. We repeated it. And even in our own with AVAP, right, Katie, there is one slide that is about our journey and what our plans are that is in every deck. I've never seen a presentation over the last 6 months that didn't have that slide, and I know that slide well. So that would be my recommendation of kind of that blanket of here's why we're doing this and here's why it's good for you. Katie, you got anything on that?
I feel like, I mean, first of all, it's a great comment because it's so true. The panic is real when they get there. And even if you have been talking to them about it for months and months, you're right, they still have that oh crap moment. I think the 2 things that really stand out for me that we're seeing a lot more need for and request for with our projects are making sure they feel supported than when the change actually comes. So the requests for like super users or people who are actually in their teams who can help support them through the change when they do reach that panic moment of I have to start using this and I don't know how, making sure that there's super user or hypercare or something kind of set up to give them that safety net makes them feel a little more willing to step into those waters with us. And the other thing, our training partners have really been leaning into as much hands-on training as they can figure out how to deliver, right? Obviously that is, a more time-intensive requirement, and, it takes a little bit more, but if you can swing it, the more that they can get hands-on practice before it ever goes live, whether it's demos, training, whatever it might be, that also seems to help alleviate some of the panic of making it less all at once and kind of that unwieldy, I feel like I am not prepared. I feel like I've been ignoring you for 6 months, but now I don't know what to do. Those are probably the 2 things that at least make them feel a little bit more willing to kind of wade in with us.
Yeah, the whole sandbox environment, we deal a lot with a lot of systems going in, and the feedback we kept getting at this last client was, we're like, I feel good about the system when we're doing all our little pulse checks. Every comment said, I'll feel better once I can see it, once I can be in it. So, we had that as part of that training, and that helps them feel more comfortable and confident. And to Katie's point of always knowing where to go for help, having those just in time, just enough, and just for me job aids where they can get it, and telling them that they exist, and here's where they are, and here's the link. And I think that's a really good point, Katie. Anything else, Michelle, before we move on to the next tip?
There's one more, and you may cover this in the next tip. It's the question of, how do we really know that message is getting all the way to the end, to the person that needs to hear it? Do you use technology to see if an email has been opened or an instant message? Do you do confirmations with the supervisors that they're actually sharing their information in their staff meetings? How do you work that?
Yes, to all of the above. We try to, whenever we have statistics, to get those statistics on who's opened the email, because you hear that a lot. I never heard about this. And you can actually come back and say, well, we sent 3 emails and you never opened them. Or you can look at that afterwards and make sure. I think I mainly know if the message is getting across by the feedback we're getting. So we do take a lot of little surveys and little things sprinkled throughout about, especially during the training aspect. And people are like, no, I didn't know there were job aids, or no, things you had counted on a leader. I also have found that people are pretty aware of how their messages get across. I know on all my projects, we kind of do a communications review of what are your vehicles, what are your most used vehicles, and then talk to those champions at the same time and say, how are you? With the hospital, it was stand-up meetings, and there just had to be trust that was happening, because you can't attend a daily nurse stand-up meeting. But that was a group that was pretty used to communicating that way. And so you kind of knew if you gave them a message, it was going to come up. But technology is obviously the simplest way. And then there's a level of trust with this group knows how to communicate a message, and usually gets through to their people.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, metrics are great and they're lovely when you can get them. Most clients I've been on have not been able to track down to like an email level of who's opening it. So it can be hard to have quantitative metrics about how successful your communications and engagement have been. Certainly if you can swing a pulse survey or readiness surveys, those are helpful. Although I know, the client I'm at now, we fight survey fatigue and trying to fit in, where ours go in the calendar and who we're targeting to make sure we're not tapping the same people 8 times during the year. And so to Stacy's point, trying to then balance that with the qualitative measurement of feedback, right? Are we still getting questions on the same things we've talked about for 2 months now? Or are people diving into even further information, which is good? That means they're comprehending what we've talked about. Now they want even more. Certainly that can be tracked during, speaking engagements or places you're showing up, like Stacy mentioned earlier in one of, I think in tip 1, right, about getting into town halls or things where they already are, tracking what kinds of questions people are asking in those sessions. But then also, when you're working with your influencers, how we said that's a 2-way street there. Task them with that. What kinds of feedback are you hearing? Are people excited? Are they understanding what's coming? Or are they still not even paying attention, or are they resistant, right? Have them kind of help take that pulse and that engage that interest and engagement out to audiences that maybe you struggle to measure their engagement. And then finally too, don't be afraid to ask leaders to do some of that work for you. We're really good at partnering with our leadership teams across the company, because at the end of the day, they're accountable for the money being spent to train their people, for their folks coming out of the field, for the adoption of it, right? The less the system is adopted, the more it hits their productivity and their ability to do business. So they have a vested interest, and sometimes it's good to remind them of that and say, talk to your people, ask your frontline leaders, ask your managers. They're talking to these folks all day. right, every day, and they have a pretty good pulse usually on how things are going. So don't be afraid to farm out your requests a little bit too sometimes, because it can't always be us and what we have access to. Sometimes we have to, like Stacy said, kind of ask some other folks to do the legwork for us when we can't, when we don't have the metrics or the access to it.
Which really leads well into Katie's next tip.
Perfect. Yeah, so tip 4 is definitely around engaging people within the project, right? So we can do a whole bunch of outreach and go out to their meetings, and we can arm people, but all the people that we want talking in those meetings, all the people that we're going to want sharing those messages, we want to make sure that they have a voice back into the project as well. So it all needs to be, collaborative as you run through this, right? So you want to make sure that your stakeholder groups are part of the project. Now, change management, we can't always control that, certainly, but we can definitely advocate for that kind of voice of the employee within the larger project, right? So how can we grow the number of stakeholders who are engaged, even outside of our work and our strategies, right? Do we have enough subject matter experts within the project team? Should we be pushing, is there a whole stakeholder group who's completely underutilized, right? We usually are doing those stakeholder assessments. We understand the full, breadth of who's going to be impacted by a change. Let's make sure that they're represented or advocating for their representation. Whether they're involved as a subject matter expert during development, whether they're, making sure that we have a broad group who's helping test the new system or test functionality. If advocate for a pilot or something where we can continue to get those voices into the process prior to it just getting, put in people's lap with deployment. And so making sure that your engagement model and what we're advocating for, goes beyond just our outreach. It also has to be really baking people into the system, and then making sure that they know how to tell that story going back out, right? So if you're actively engaged as a tester, you're in a far better position to tell people the story of what's happening or serve as a super user like we talked about, right? These are the people then you can lean on throughout the project to help their peers. And we kind of talked about the whole elevator deck kind of going away, that foundational walking deck. But don't forget to make sure that they all feel prepared with at least how to answer, what are you doing these days, right? Especially as people are going back into the office. We're running into more people in the hallway or at happy hour. We're messaging people, throughout the day. People have a vast work network. It is not just their current role. If they've been at the company longer than probably 3 years, they've probably been in at least more than one role, maybe on different teams, right? People know a lot of people. Other people have left and moved on. And so there are a lot of people that we don't even think about that we talk to in a day, but we do. And so the more you have some of these folks engaged in the project, if they run into someone and they say, well, what are you doing? And they say, oh, well, I'm still here, but hey, actually, I'm helping with testing for this new system. It's going to be really cool because this functionality is going to get way better than our old system, and we just tested it today. That starts to continue to build that awareness and that excitement, just because they were engaged in the project on the back end. So, it's can be a challenge sometimes to get leaders to give you the people for some of these roles, but it is really important as much as possible for us as change managers to really push for it and keep them honest about, we need that engagement, we need that skin in the game, we need the investment from all of our stakeholder groups, and that's only going to help us as we move forward, as they help get other people engaged and on board.
Katie, I love that example of a broad work network. I was at a company where everyone in my department ate at their desk and was, just looked like they were heads down and they were working hard instead of going to lunch. And I went to lunch every day. And I literally, my boss at the time said, I'm just not sure you're as committed. There was some craziness around that I was actually taking a lunch and wasting time. And I said, I get more done in that hour than I would get sitting at my desk because of that interaction and networking. And I was in the HR department, and so was able to get feedback and do those things. And I just think that's really important, especially like you said, with people going back into the office. People want to catch up. You know, we've been having happy hours over Zoom for too long. And so this idea to be able to don't get me wrong, AVAP, please don't stop the happy hours. But this idea of getting back into an office and getting back to have things to talk about and what's been going on with you, these are perfect ways to get those people, to get other people to get engaged in what's happening. All right. Fifth and final, tell a story. You know, we've talked about how short people's attention spans are now. But when you can make it a story, you can hold their attention. And the example I'm going to use is Netflix. My daughter talked me into watching a show that I had said, no, not my style, and called Yellow Jackets. I don't know if you're familiar, but it's a lot. And I was like, no. And she's like, just sit down and watch one with me. And it was Saturday morning. And we watched the first one, and I was like, oh, okay, that's interesting. And then we watched the second, and we watched the third. So my 47-second attention span that they captured during the commercials wasn't enough, but they were able to make a story that was compelling enough that we watched all of season one on Saturday, and all of season 2 on Sunday. That's a big time commitment. But, you know, there's this immersive state that you kind of get into because your brain, it actually releases oxytocin when you get that whole thing. So they kind of hook you in, but then you can focus on the story itself, and the story is compelling. And so if you can really do that, you can get past that 47 seconds of paying attention, because when you're really immersed in a story, so taking people on the journey, talking a lot about the current pain points and what the future will look like. You know, I go through a lot where I say, you know, a lot of times you just want to say, oh, this will make your life easier. I don't like to use the word easy, because if it's not easy when they do it, then you either lied to them or they're stupid. You don't want either one of those. So that little, oh, it'll make your life better, is better to really be able to draw a picture and tell a story of those benefits, rather than just you're going to like it. Because even things that people are really looking forward to, like Katie started out with, there's going to be some resistance. There's going to be some change. You know, so to be able to really highlight and take them on that trip with you, with those small little wins, with that picture, with that demonstration, kind of wrapping all the things we just talked about into an actual story, because you're going to gravitate to that familiar, but you're really going to be hooked with the novelty. And Yellow Jackets is very good. Even if you start it and you go, oh, this is super creepy, you should continue to watch it. But that's my commercial for Netflix. But that's how they hook you in. I mean, you've seen on Netflix, they even put up that little thing that seems somewhat insulting that says, are you still watching? And I'm like, well, okay, I've let it just autoplay for 4 hours, but yes, I'm still watching. And you can do those stories and make them unique to the people that you're talking to, you know, really work with. So that suggestion of really customizing that approach and making sure you're working with those business partners to explore those options on what kind of story, what do people need to hear to make them feel good about this and to make them feel positive about this, is really, you know, what you want to focus on, and take that time to develop that story from that short little elevator pitch to this is, you know, how we're going to sustain their attention, is that storytelling aspect.
And it's not as hard as it sounds, right? Like if you ask your business partner, you're like, hey, I see this, thing, this particular feature is changing, or, you talk about a change impact that's coming, and you ask them to explain it to you, right? They tend to tell it to you as a story. Well, today our technicians have to X, Y, Z, they have to go to a separate app, they have to do this, this, and this, and tomorrow it's going to be 2 steps in the same app. It's going to come up with this notification and they're done. That is a story, right? That's better than saying, we're going from this, process to this process. Whereas they kind of told it to you in the story. So sometimes it's just a matter of having that conversation, like you mentioned, Stacy, right? Of working with your business partners and talking through it, from that WIFM perspective, from that employee perspective. What's it actually going to look like for them? And telling it that way, instead of, the nuts and bolts benefits that you tend to put in like a leadership deck, or, a budget approval deck, or the things, they don't care about productivity numbers. To your point, they don't want to be told it's easier. You're setting yourself up to fail. But if you can talk about specific things that are going to improve, or ways that, this is a pain point. We've heard you, this is not great, and we're going to make it better for you by X, Y, or Z. It helps them connect those dots, and certainly, as we said, pay attention a little bit more. They want to know how it's going to help them.
Yeah, when it's a big process change, we sometimes go to the day in a life. Currently you had to do X, Y, Z, and then this had to be communicated, and then you had to copy that and fax this, and then you had to, and now you'll be able to focus your attention on your customer who's standing in front of you, instead of having to do X, Y, Z. And that sounds exciting to them. That's, oh, I'm really here to service my customer, and I can talk to them more because I'm not worried about the 5 documents that I have to fax, and the 10 things I have to put in, and the 15 screens I need to flip through to get to the thing I want to talk to them about. So just being able to do that, this is how your day will change and your interactions, and here's the great things about that.
Absolutely.
So what other ideas have you seen or successfully used for your own projects? Pop that in chat, or if there's any other Q&A, let us know. Michelle?
And while we're talking about that, we do have time for a few questions now. So just a reminder to post your questions in the question box located in the panel on the right-hand side of the screen. Oh, and I do see some questions coming in.
Great.
And this one is, this one's a very interesting question. It says that my leadership is anxious and would like to see everything on the roadmap, whereas the employees are overwhelmed with getting too much information. You talked a little bit about knowing your audience, but how do you handle that to give the executive leadership what they need, but also to get the right information out to the whole company?
You want that one, Katie, or?
And we both like went, okay.
We both are like,
it's absolutely right. I mean, I think in a lot of my projects, it just comes down to having multiple versions or multiple views of the same information. We absolutely have more detailed slides and roadmaps and decks that we use in, steering committee meetings, or when we're meeting with, operations leadership, where they really need to understand, all of the details behind the project, the budget, the resources, everything, and really what that's going to look like as they plan operationally for the coming years. But absolutely is not a level of detail that anyone else cares about. You go out into the employee groups or a lot of your stakeholders, and really, if anything, they want it the opposite way, which is get rid of everything but what is specifically going to be mine, which is sometimes too detailed, right? You don't need to manage 18 versions of the same roadmap. But yeah, we definitely, we'll have a couple versions of it. And then it really comes down to just making sure you're working with that leadership team and coaching them on what view is appropriate for which meetings, right? If you're going to be asking them to take information, make sure you are clear, right? Just because you have this roadmap in the deck we're talking through today in our SteerCo meeting does not mean we want you to take this slide. We sent you this link, or we're sending you this other version of this slide that is for everyone else, because we don't want to overwhelm them, or we don't want to share too much. Most leaders get that. If you get pushback, I mean, certainly if you have any kind of metrics or feedback around, I can't hear anymore, I'm overwhelmed, don't stop telling me all this stuff, don't be afraid to use that as well, to help counsel them, and try to strategically move them away from some of the details to the larger groups.
Yeah, what we just did with the client is we had a deck and it went to a steering committee and it literally said, do not share this deck. And then had speaker notes in bullets below saying, and then here's a deck you can share. And it was so that they could even see the different messages that were going to people. So to Katie's point, we did have many iterations of the deck, and you just have to be real because they're used to just forwarding things along. And we'd say, do not share this deck, or, this deck contains financial information that you don't want others to see, to give them the reason, but just be real clear on what is to be shared. And most of the time they want you to share it anyway, or they want their direct reports to share it. So we really, if it's a big cascading company, just made sure they had the tools on what they should cascade and what they shouldn't cascade. Anything else, Michelle?
There is one other question, and it has to do with, are there different communications that need to occur after the changes occurred?
Most definitely. There's certainly the feedback loop of, any sort of poll you want to take or survey you want to take, but the messaging that I always find is the most valuable is, where do I go for help? Because people are in there, they're starting to be in the system, and they're like, oh wait, I have all these questions. So make sure they understand where the job aids are. Remind them of, if there's a hypercare situation, how long that hypercare situation lasts, and then how do they go through? So, like ServiceNow or whatever, when will that transition and what will that look like? Because you're getting these people, and that's probably the most feedback I've seen after go lives is people were like, yeah, the training was great, I was ready, and then I stumbled and I didn't know what to do. And so it's what is that process? Is there a hypercare for a couple weeks? It's very hands-on, handheld. They have service level agreements that say they'll get a response and a correction within 4 hours if it's a priority one. So that's a high touch hypercare. But then when that rolls off, where are the job aids? Where is the, how do I report if I have an incident, and what does that look like? And so I would just say most of the communication is a celebration, obviously, that we've gone live, and then where do you go for help? Because people will fall into that mode of, oh wait, I've been in this hypercare, I've been in this, and they've responded immediately, and I'm going to have that expectation that that's going to last forever. And so directing them till, I always tell teams, you help them fix the problem the first time, and then the second time they ask that same question, you show them how to solve that problem for themselves, so that you're not the responsible person from a technical standpoint forever. Because it's easy for the technical team to say, I can just fix this myself. Here, let me just take care of that for you. Or when in fact, directing them, teaching them to fish, the old is going to be more helpful. So I think most of that messaging is around celebration and around, how do I get help when it doesn't go as smoothly as I think it will go.
highlighting some good success stories is good too, especially if there's like a new functionality that you want to remind people to use. You know, highlighting someone who used it successfully or who had a good experience, was able to have a big win because of it. Just helping people see, again, to that storytelling, how it actually takes shape in their new environment.
And that does lead us kind of into this slide, Katie.
Yep, so this is just our reminder for everyone. We shared some of our top tips and tricks, but it's always important to customize your approach. We all work in different, with different clients or in different companies. So be mindful of how some of these things need to kind of adjust and be thoughtful about how you bring it to your work day. Think about the work environment. Do you have people, are your stakeholders largely office workers? They might have more regular meeting cadence. They might read their email more. Or do you have field workers and someone needs to go out with an iPad and actually kind of help take that message to them? Your workplace culture, do they rely on hierarchy and tradition? Do you have long tenured stakeholders? Are they new to their role, right? Those are the types of questions that'll help you pick those influencers, right? Do you need people in a position of power? Or is it okay if it's, someone new to the team, but who's, known as the tech person in their group, right? And then don't forget your project methodology as well. Whether you're waterfall, agile, or something in between, think about your project schedule and timeline, what's going to be available to talk about at what points, and really try to be intentional about what of those strategies you can really make work with your team and your project.
Great.
Those are great tips that you all have provided today. And I did want to thank Katie and Stacy for the tips and reminders and the wonderful presentation, making us think of how do we get our communication at the right level so it's heard and heard at the right time. I did want to thank everyone for participating on the ACMP webinar today. And I just wanted to let you know that immediately following the webinar, the feedback survey will pop up, and we'd like to ask you to take just a few moments to complete our survey, as your feedback helps us shape future webinars. Also, don't forget to join the webinar exchange community and ACMP Connect, continue the conversation and engage with our speaker and fellow participants. I know that all of the questions we didn't have time to be able to get to them, that you all would probably like to continue that conversation. So we will have a space so that you can, again, continue that conversation. This recording will be available next week in the webinar section in the ACMP Resource Library, located on the ACMP website at acmpglobal.org. Again, thank you very much for your participation and have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.